¿Qué quieres trabajo hacer cuando eres adulto?
Enfermera.
Bombero.
Bombero, sí. ¿Y tú? We started with the question, what do you want to be when you grow up? A question that all of us have been asked at one point or another. As we know, our hopes and aspirations for our future changes as we get older. We may become more realistic or our interests simply change. But how does the culture we live in influence our ambitions? And how does education or lack thereof impact the opportunities to choose and become what we desire? In Guatemala, according to data collected in 2016, 32.3% of the labor force works in agriculture, 18.5% in industry, and 49.2% in services. Let's take this data back to the children we interviewed at the Escuela Oficial Rural Mixta in Panimacoc, Guatemala.
If we take this small sample of 10 kids, we can see that the statistics run this way. 0% desired in occupation in agriculture, 50% in industry, and 50% in services. However, what is the likelihood that these kids, with the intent on becoming doctors and firemen and politicians, will end up in similar roles as what the national data tells us about the labor force in Guatemala?
Well, what did the parents of these 10 kids do? 50% are farmers working in the agricultural labor force, and many of us working in the fields with them, briefly experiencing the long, thankless jobs that they endure. 20% were teachers, 20% policemen, and 10% firemen.
¿Y qué hacen tus padres para trabajo? Okay. ¿Y tú?
Una es bombero y otra es maestra.
¿Y tú?
Let's also look into the place where these 10 kids live, Panimacoc. Panimacoc is a small village next to Tecpan, which is located in the Guatemalan highlands in the state of Chimaltenango, in between Antigua and Antitlan. The temperate climate provides the perfect environment to cultivate strawberries and other fruits and vegetables. 60,000 people live in this region, and 90% identify as indigenous Kachikal-Mayans. Panimacoc is one long dirt road, filled with various types of farmers, all of whom are working just to get by. Their work is backbreaking and is often exploited by outside players looking to make a quick dollar. There are few industry services and careers around the area of Tecpan, encouraging many to farm instead.
Herbert Morales, a host brother in the program, spent 5 hours driving each day to attend school in Antigua and to work as a physical therapist for special needs children in a hospital in Guatemala City. Needless to say, the opportunities in this area are lacking, even for those who manage to receive a valuable education. In Tecpan, it is not uncommon to meet people who have two jobs. The Ashit family, in addition to working the usual jobs as lawyer, teacher, and director of the Panimacoc school, owned a bicycle shop in which they all work when coming home.
When we spent 4 weeks working in the fields of Panimacoc and living in Tecpan, we noticed that parents didn't have resources to send their children to school. The children would work on their families' farms instead. Many were required to work for free for their fathers. The minimum wage per day in Guatemala is $9.70, or 71 quetzales and 40 centavos for agricultural and non-agricultural work. The farmers in Panimacoc earned 50 quetzales, roughly $6.80 for a full day's worth of work. During one day at work, we met two young 11-year-olds who were taking a year off of school so that they could save money in order to be able to attend school the following year. Ultimately, with the resources that Panimacoc has in terms of wealth, local employment opportunities, familial tradition, and education, the opportunities for these children are limited. But what exactly is the education that these kids receive? And does it enable them to do the jobs that they desire? Let's look into what the teachers of the Panimacoc School have to tell us about the education system in Guatemala.
¿Qué es tu trabajo ahora?
Aparte de ser maestro, tengo un pequeño negocio en la tarde que es una librería donde se venden útiles escolares y sembrar para en la familia.
¿Se gusta su trabajo?
Sí, me gusta compartir con los niños, que ellos aprendan y que puedan superarse a nivel personal.
¿Se gustaría tener un trabajo diferente?
Sí, me gustaría porque por la situación económica que no alcanza el dinero, pues uno tiene que buscar para que alcance la economía en la familia.
¿Y qué piensa usted de del sistema de educación?
Pues falta mucha capacitación para los maestros y falta también material didáctico para los niños, útiles escolares y también las instalaciones que a veces están muy abandonadas, las escuelas.
¿Se gustaría tener un trabajo diferente?
Sí, me gustaría ser psicóloga
Ah, ¿por qué?
porque me gusta también ver más allá de los niños.
¿Y qué piensa usted del sistema de educación?
Pues que todavía falta un poco que arreglar, porque hay muchas, aquí en Guatemala hay mucha carencia, hay mucha pobreza sobre todo, ¿verdad? Y entonces nos gustaría cambiar ese rumbo, ¿verdad? Pero falta mucho que arreglar, ¿no?
¿Se gusta su trabajo?
Me encanta estar con mis niños.
¿Se gustaría tener un trabajo diferente?
No, simplemente dedicarme a mi casa cuando regreso, de trabajar y a la iglesia, que también tengo privilegio en la iglesia.
¿Qué piensa usted del sistema de educación?
El sistema de educación, pues quizás no esté de acorde a las necesidades de los niños, pero nosotros como docentes tenemos que poner de nuestra parte también para involucrar a los niños y que no haya mucha deficiencia en ellos. Más está en nosotros quienes somos los que compartimos con ellos.
Although school is free and compulsory in Guatemala, the attendance in primary education is 81%, and Guatemala remains to have the lowest literacy rate in Central America. In 2011, the average student received 4.1 years of schooling. As this data shows, getting sufficient education is not an easy task for Guatemalan children. So for those who are fortunate enough to attend school longer than the average 4.1 years, is there still space for dreams? How many of those children, as they grow up and become conscious of the harsh realities of the world, decide to work hard to get out of poverty and make a reasonable living wage in order to support their family? In the Escuela Oficial Rural Mixta, kids stop going to school at the age of 12, and only 30% continue their education past that. The ones that do must work in order to be able to attend school, leaving the morning for work and evenings for studying. The odds are not in favor for a Guatemalan child who wishes to continue their education, and for the ones that want to become doctors, lawyers, and even teachers, education is compulsory.
What are the chances that one of these kids will have the opportunity to pursue their dream? Educational opportunity, or lack thereof, not only impacts a child, but also the nation's economy, as well as perpetuates the disparity between urban and rural populations, indigenous and Ladino groups, as well as male and female students. As of 2016, 1 in 10 Guatemalans are illiterate, half of the population has only a primary education, and demonstrate difficulty completing multiplication problems and composing short sentences. 1/5 are able to attend secondary school, and less than a tenth of the labor force holds a university degree or higher. These statistics show that the education system that we briefly experienced not only impacts a single child in Penny-McCoke, but is an issue that plagues all of Guatemala.
Generally, it is not easy to obtain a quality education in Guatemala, even for Guatemalan children who have more access to quality education by being male, non-indigenous, and being raised in urban regions. Out of the 17,263,239 people living in Guatemala, 39.8% are indigenous and speak indigenous dialects. This is bewildering due to the fact that only 65% of the population speaks Spanish, the language spoken in schools. However, compared to a Guatemalan child born female, indigenous, and grows up in rural areas such as Panamacoke, it can even be more tough to continue or engage in their education. These are some other factors that give us insight into how and what else might impact a child's education, future job opportunities, and careers. Briefly exploring Guatemala's history might explain why there is such disparity in who gets a good education in Guatemala. During the 26 years of civil war, the indigenous population suffered through the silent genocide. 32,632 Mayans perished. It is no surprise that indicates a difference between the level of education indigenous people and non-indigenous people receive. In rural and urban regions, 10 more non-indigenous girls between the ages of 7 and 12 were enrolled in school than indigenous girls. Also, 9% more non-Indigenous boys were enrolled in school than Indigenous boys. This data demonstrates money is not the only reason Guatemalan children do not attend school, but a range of populous and cultural barriers created by the nation's history is also an important factor.
If we were to make an assumption about where these kids might end up working, I would say many of them would follow in the footsteps of their parents, working on their families' farms that they have owned for decades. And some may be becoming teachers like their parents, and very few becoming lawyers or doctors or politicians. This is what seemed to be the reality when we lived in Tecpan, Guatemala. So what? Why is getting a quality education important? Oftentimes, we approach the world and its issues with a naive mindset. That's something we learned about ourselves during our 3 months in Central America. We used to believe solutions of change were simple: help people, give money, show love. As it turns out, the answers to issues that riddle the world are not easy, simple, or linear. They are complex systems that involve a multitude of aspects, integrated from all facets of society. So then, how do we effect positive change? How do we promote development? What is development? And how does education play a role in a country's development? We're not so sure. It's a web of complexity that we have yet to fully understand, and we're not sure if we ever will because these systems are complex, incorporating systems within systems. They are made up of different elements, relationships, and purposes. There is a profusion of various components involved, all with functions and purposes that differ from the next. How do we bring everyone together to unite under a common goal or belief? Millions of people work in education and development, but not many agree or can truly answer what is development, what is progress, what is positive change. There are many moving parts, and we as TPP students are forced to ask ourselves where we fit into the picture. When are we perpetuating injustices? How do we play a role as an oppressor? How can we empower other people to liberate themselves? How can we better understand local communities and provide support? It's something we will be contemplating for quite some time, and something we will ask critically of those in the world of development and around us. As we tell the narrative of Penny McCoke and the education system in rural areas of Guatemala, we also illustrate a key point of our learning: understanding the privilege we have. Privilege to receive an education that prioritizes the necessary resources to produce an effective and empowering pedagogy, to have families that support us, to acknowledge our background and identity that we were born with and the role that it plays in our education, and understanding the systems that make it so that children in Guatemala don't have those same opportunities. These ideals are illustrated in an interview we conducted with our program leaders about their educational experience in the United States.
Education was a big part of the conversation growing up. So my dad didn't go to college. He's worked in the same factory for the last 25 or 27 years. And so that was something he did not want for me. And so it really pushed the importance and value of getting a good education and taking school really seriously.
But also just asking me, like, how did school go today? And asking me about what I'm learning. And pushing me to kind of reflect on that and think more deeply about the importance of what I'm learning and also kind of all the varying aspects of it. All of that shows parents that are engaged, advocating for their child's education, that care about it. It's really important.
I don't think I realized until I was an adult and in graduate school the kind of quality education that I had coming from my socioeconomic status as a child. And so I think my dad made a lot of sacrifices so I could access a really high quality education.
There's a world of difference between the schools I went to and the school I was working in, Boston Public Schools, in terms of teachers, teaching experience, administration, resources. There are very many, there are a huge number of differences between the schooling I got and the schooling that a lot of other kids get. So I'm really grateful for all the educational access I got and having parents at home that cared about my education, that moved me to schools that they knew would give me a good education, and really just were good advocates for me, because I know not every child has that.
But I think without the opportunities I had growing up and the opportunity to go to college and to study abroad and have these experiences, I wouldn't have ended up where I am now. What a spectacular opportunity that was for my life.
We believe that where you start in life shouldn't dictate